Back with you tonight on In Focus. 2 months before the uprising in Soweto, on that fateful frosty Wednesday morning at Naledi High School, pupil Enos Ngutshane penned a letter to the then-Bantu Education Minister, MC Botha, pleading against Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. When police came to fetch Ngutshane from school, pandemonium broke out when pupils refused to release him and instead overturned the police vehicle. 2 days before June 16, Ngutshane found himself in police custody. Now, he never saw the events of the day, but Professor Enos Ngutshane joins us now to reflect on his pivotal missive. Prof, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. When you read newspapers and you pick up and they've written the troublemaker who started it all, and your name appears there, what comes to your mind?
That's a very good question. You know, what comes into mind is, the events themselves that led, to me just sitting down and thinking of writing to the Minister of Bantu Education, MC Botha. You could see that I was a frustrated student, a student who could see that the doors of learning were just shutting, in front of my eyes. And therefore, somebody needed to respond to me. Yeah. To say, yes, I'm imposing Afrikaans as a medium of instruction because I want you to succeed in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Afrikaans was not my mother tongue. It was not even my second language. Therefore, it really created a serious problem in terms of me thinking about, proceeding with my studies.
Yeah. When you look back then on that day that changed your life, first and foremost, between yourself and Mr. Mutaipani, what was happening in the organization, the South African student movement, and what were some of the pillars of that movement that really sparked the kind of ideas that you were having that even would lead you to write a letter of this nature?
You are right. SASM played a very critical role in conscientizing us and mobilizing us as students. The other aspect that is important to mention is that we came from the youth clubs, right? Youth clubs such as Youth Alive in Dube, youth clubs such as Teen Outreach in Naledi, youth clubs such as the Young Ambassadors in CWJ in Soweto. Those were structures that really mobilized us in terms of understanding the dynamics of the apartheid regime at that particular time. Our important university as well, Weggespreid in Roodepoort, yeah. Where we met as members of SASM to analyze, the total structure of the apartheid regime, to look at Bantu education itself, to question, a number of issues that our parents failed to sort of, question. Yeah. Therefore, we were this type of the youth that was questioning a lot of things, and therefore we're not prepared to sit back and accept Afrikaans as a medium of instruction in our schools.
Do you see traces of that today in the youth of today, in youth activism today? Do you see traces of that replaying itself?
Unfortunately not, because our youth are facing, a total setup, of challenges such as unemployment, unequal opportunities, there's poverty, there's crime, there's substance abuse, there's alcoholism, there's gender-based violence. They are challenged by a number of issues that we were not confronted with. If you look at, university students, they struggle with student accommodation, right? So they are confronted with different challenges. Therefore, they are focusing on those issues that are confronting them now, unlike us, who were confronted by a regime that wanted to oppress us. We therefore had a common enemy that we could confront.
It was April when you penned the letter. Tell us the events that followed thereafter in your own mind as they play out leading up to June 8th.
You know, the regime acted in a funny way, so to say, because there's a letter. You're a minister, you receive a letter. Why don't you invite me for coffee, for tea, so that we, discuss the content of the letter itself? You explain to me. But they respond in a manner that is totally strange. They come to my place, they want to arrest me. I request them to produce a warrant of arrest. They fail to produce it. Then they decide to come to the school. On the 8th of June, drive into the schoolyard. We respected our school. We used to call it the great school on the Golden West, Naledi High.
Yeah.
Therefore, you couldn't just come and challenge us in our school. So the 8th of June itself, turned out to be a difficult day for the regime, because we reacted in that way. We burned their car, set it ablaze, and the police ran into the principal's office. And you know what they did? In the evening, they came and pulled out that wreckage of the car.
Sure.
And put it outside the school, and went to sort of write in the newspapers that the car was involved in a car accident. So you could see that the regime was totally embarrassed, and they did not expect the way we respected. No, the way we reacted as a student of Naledi High.
Yeah.
So those events, keep on coming back as well.
Yeah.
And they say to me that as students of the class of 76, we were courageous, we were brave, we were disciplined, we were focused, on achieving results in whatever we were doing.
You're saying it reflected and indicated the level of frustration that was now beginning to be prevalent in society. When the burning occurred, did it at all occur to you that this was the turning point in this particular struggle, that a couple of days from there, we would be speaking of June 16?
Yes, by that time, as you know, the secondary schools were already, up in arms. The Daliwongas, the Pefeni Junior Secondary, the Tula Sizwes, the Thomas Mufulos were all out in the streets. And therefore, we as high school students, we came late into the picture, okay? And therefore, when we came into the picture, we organized and established the Soweto Student Representative Council, where we could now sit and consolidate, analyze, the type of challenges that we're confronted with, and prepare ourselves to confront the regime. That is when we met on the 13th of June, 3 days before June 16, to organize the march itself on June 16. We knew that we were going to be challenging a regime that is prepared really to react in a very negative way. But we knew that we wanted change in South Africa. We wanted a proper type of education that will deliver results and empower us as students and the class of 1976.
Speaking of a regime that would react in any way, and knowing already at that time that there was already a bullseye on your back, if you were not arrested, do you think things would have turned out differently for your life?
Of course, I would have continued as a member of the Soweto Student Representative Council to represent my school, to challenge the regime, right? Because we now saw a bigger picture, not just Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, but the total destruction of the regime itself.
Yeah.
So we were prepared.
But I'm just talking particularly on June 16, on the day, depending on where you were going to be. I mean, we were speaking of Hector Peterson and what happened to him. Do you think, had you not been arrested, in terms of your life, there would have been a different outcome?
No, the Student Representative Council was organized. Yes, Enos was arrested 2 days before June 16. Yes, Enos was appearing at Portia Magistrates Court on June 16 itself. He never saw what happened on June 16. But the process continued without me, because the leaders were there, like C.S. Mashinini, Sepo Siashulo, Tibelo Mtapanyana,
right.
David Kutumela. I can count a number of them who were there just leading the march.
Speaking of you appearing, a very interesting story that I read. How did you get out? You relate the story.
That's an interesting one. You know what happened? On June 16 itself, since the regime was all over the place, Soweto and some of the parts that were burning in the country, they were just arresting almost everybody. Even people who were working, coming back from Joburg, alighting from the stations such as Pefeni, Dube, Tlazane, and the others, they were all arrested.
Yeah.
Now, when I appeared in court for the second time, I was no longer alone. We were about 10. Now, when we were remanded, I was asking these guys, but who are you guys? From which school are you coming from? They said, no, we just arrested. We're coming from work. And I remember one of the guys was a brother to Musamieni, right? Then I sat back, I said to myself, wow, this is great, man. I'll also claim that I was arrested when I was coming.
and that was a good defense. It stuck.
Oh yes, it worked for me. You know that when we appeared, we were all released.
Now
2 days after that, Helen Suzman asked a question in Parliament: where is the youth that started this thing?
Yeah.
And Jimmy Kruger just stood up and said the youth has spirited away.
Now you're out, and you've already mentioned Youth Alive, which I figure that's probably where you met Reverend Frank Chikade.
No, we were in Naledi High with
I
Reverend Frank Chikade. Yeah, we're at Naledi Teen Outreach Club.
Right.
And Frank Chikade, yes.
And he sends you away. How was that experience of being, I suppose, taken away into a new environment?
Sure, that was challenging. You know, as a young person who grew up in Soweto, here you are now in Seshego, right? With a new family, you are in the house, you are not supposed to go out. It really frustrated me. And I really wanted to see myself where action was in Soweto. You know, so I stayed there for about 3 months or so. And later I said to Muruti Frank, you know what, I'm going back to Soweto. Interestingly, when I came back, everybody was asking for AK-47s because they thought I came back from Tanzania.
Wow. Now you say already you realized at that point that the problem was just not about Afrikaans, but it was really about fighting the regime. Just the 2 sentences from your letter: stop shoving Afrikaans down the people's throats, but also you're saying this enforcing of Afrikaans is becoming a big problem for us as black students. I read that line and I think maybe in a sense it also speaks of today, a big problem for black students in the country. It's not Afrikaans, but the big problem for black students in the country today is something else, is graduating and not finding unemployment, and whether there are ideas that would be an ignition of change towards that particular big problem for black students in South Africa today.
Sure. You know, I was saying earlier on in one of the platforms that this is not the type of education that we fought for. If you look at where we came from since the first Minister of Education, Minister Bengu, all these ministers, Kada Asmal and the rest, they've just been gerrymandering with the system of education. There was outcomes-based education. Today they are talking about curriculum, assessment, policy statements. There's confusion, right? And you can see that they don't know where they are taking us to. And they're creating a lot of problems for our children, right? We are confronted with a type of education that produces job seekers instead of producing entrepreneurs who can be, independent, instead of producing engineers, actuaries, financial analysts, right? You name it, okay? It's a useless type of education. Where have you had a situation where a minister would say, if we can do away with English and mathematics, our results are going to look good? Where have you had such a thing? Therefore, it's a pity that our children are still confronted with a system of education that is useless, that is not taking them anywhere.
Prof, let's leave it there for tonight because of time. Thank you very much for coming through. Professor Enos Ngutshane there, relating, of course, his experience of the June 16 uprising. When we